Chapter 3. The Nonconformists. Eugene had begun his philosophic search by repudiating the very thing he was seeking. At the deepest level, he was being driven to find God, but he would have to go full circle before unexpectedly returning upon that from which he was running. Young people like Eugene, being at an age of acute self-consciousness and spiritual hunger, are apt to fall into despair at not finding fulfillment in the material world, and to be, in the words of the young poet John Keats, half in love with easeful death. Although Eugene had hardly started out in life, he already had a longing to leave this world behind. In the midst of his doubts and confusion, there was only one person to whom he began to open his inner world. This was a young woman, a freshman like himself, named Alison Harris. In November of 1952, Eugene went to a concert at the Bridges Auditorium on the college campus. The gray winter sky was darkening as he climbed the steps and walked under the lofty archway. The building was at that time the largest auditorium in California, with tall Grecian pillars in front, over which the names of great composers were chiseled. The music, Schumann's piano concerto, was particularly stirring. After the concert, as Eugene was walking down the aisle, he was greeted by an acquaintance named Dirk van Noes. Beside Dirk was his date, Alison. Eugene had seen Alison before in a class they had together, the history of Western civilization, but he hadn't met her until now. Alison was at once intrigued with Eugene. She liked the dignified way he carried himself. She thought he was handsome, but what especially struck her was the strange, melancholy depth of his eyes. After Dirk made the introductions, he asked Eugene to have coffee with him and Alison. Eugene accepted Dirk's offer, and the three of them stepped out into the cold night air. They went nearby to the Sugar Bowl, a small, inexpensive cafe run by two quiet ladies. As they warmed themselves with the coffee, they spoke of how the music that night had moved them. After that fateful night in November, Dirk, Eugene, Alison, and others began to go to the Sugar Bowl to study. They formed a group of friends made up of the nonconformists of the campus who were interested in things other than popularity and success. As with Eugene's group of friends in high school, this new group was united by a common love for art, music, and literature. Like Eugene, Alison was a quiet person and deeply lonely. She had come from an artistic family, her mother having been an opera singer and her uncle a screenwriter. At the tender age of 18, she had already experienced much pain in her life. There were periods in her past too horrible to remember. She could recall nothing before the age of 8. Having been driven into a shell by the overpowering and sometimes ruthless personality of her egotistical mother, she was terribly shy around others. She tried to take after her saintly grandmother. By the time Eugene met her, she had become a devout Christian, having been converted largely through the poetry of T.S. Eliot. With her thin body and face, her sharply outlined features, and her shoulder-length dark blonde hair, people said she looked just like the actress Lauren Bacall. She herself, however, disliked this actress and wanted to be more like Jennifer Jones, who had made her screen debut at Alison's age, playing Saint Bernadette of Lourdes. Dirk van Noes, who insisted that his name be pronounced Dirk, was an unusual young man. Gifted with a brilliant mind, he had started college when he was but 16 years old. He had a great knowledge of music and went on to become a professional writer. For a while he was receiving D and F grades for his English composition papers, simply because his spelling was atrocious. When Allison began editing his papers, changing nothing at all except the spelling, he instantly received A's. He came from a wealthy family which never pushed him to be anything. One Thanksgiving vacation, the group of friends went to stay at his parents' large home in Berkeley. The most gregarious of the group, Dirk had a good sense of humor and a special talent for giving people nicknames. His own girlfriend he called Straw-Headed Thing. Eugene, however, retained the nickname he had received in high school. All of his college friends called him Owen, and he even signed his letters to Allison this way. Another member of the group was Albert Carter, a history major. Very mature for his age, Albert was even-tempered, always sympathetic and understanding of others, and ready to listen. He went on to get his PhD at Princeton and teach English in a university. Among the young women in the group was Lee Van Deventer, who later married Albert and, like him, was a very compassionate person. Remembered as a lively conversationalist, she was majoring in comparative literature and later became a schoolteacher. There was also Claire Isaacs, an earthy, outspoken drama major, who took on the role of the mother of the group. Though not religious, Claire was very proud of her Jewish heritage. The group also had a music major, Lawrence McGilvary, a modern, sophisticated young man pursuing a wide interest in the arts. He later became an independent publisher and purveyor of art books. Also in the group was John Ziegel, a postulant for the priesthood in the Anglican Church. Highly educated for his age, John had studied Latin for 4 years at a boys' school run by the Episcopal Order of the Holy Cross. He had a beautiful singing voice, and at night he would chant his prayers in Latin out of a Roman Catholic service book. He loved the high art of the Western Church, its Gregorian chant, and its ancient ceremony. According to his fellow Anglican Allison, however, he had not yet found true joy or peace in his faith, and was still trying to come to grips with it. He majored in classics at Pomona, and, like Albert, went on to become an English professor. Of all the students in the group, the one that Eugene most admired was a Japanese-American named Kaizo Kubo. Kaizo was 24 years old, considerably older than the others, being a transfer student to Pomona. Although he was not of the popular crowd, he was one of the most widely respected students on campus due to his integrity and honor in dealing with people. After Pearl Harbor, when Kaizo was only 14, he and his family had been evacuated with many other Japanese Americans to a restriction camp and relocation center. "I don't bear any grudge against America," he used to say. "If the Japanese had been in the Americans' shoes, they would have been much crueler." His family was poor. Both his parents worked as day laborers, packing fruit and picking tomatoes under the hot sun. In 1950, soon after his father died, he entered Ridley Junior College in the San Joaquin Valley. In his junior year, he transferred to Pomona as a history major, having been given a full tuition grant. In his senior year, to pay for his room and board, he got a job as a resident assistant in one of the dormitories. Like Eugene, Kaizo was a loner, emotionally reserved and inscrutable, but when he spoke, he did so with simplicity and intensity. He never fully became part of the group of friends and seemed to feel himself an outsider wherever he was, which Albert attributed to his early experience of being sent to the relocation center. He did, however, spend a lot of time with Eugene. Eugene's college friends remember Eugene as having been very genial, and their relationships with him marked by a certain dignity. They remember his understated wit, his ability to see things differently, and make observations on life which were the reverse of the usual ones, observations which at times made his friends roll with laughter. All the male friends mention his remarkable athletic ability. He was enormously strong, Dirk says. Whenever the group would get together to play games in the quadrangle, volleyball, baseball, etc., Eugene would throw himself into the match with enthusiasm and outstrip them all, so that they would consider it a misfortune to be placed on the opposite team. Notwithstanding such camaraderie, Eugene was remembered by his friends as being enigmatic. The others noticed that he often took long walks alone at night, brooding for hours on end. His hair, John says, would often hang disheveled over his eyes, giving him an almost manic appearance. Not until many years later, however, did the people in the group, save for Allison, understand what depths of loneliness, bitterness, and depression lay within their retiring friend. As some of them would later say, "We never knew him." As said above, there was no one in the world but Allison to whom Eugene was able to disclose his soul and reveal his pain. Allison remembers well one evening in 1954 when he told her things about himself that he said he had never told anyone else in his life. His friendship with her was and remained a platonic one, yet Allison was later to regard it as deeper than any other relationship she ever had, even while married. Their kinship had nothing to do with common interests. In many ways, Eugene and Allison were very unlike each other. While Eugene was a Nietzschean unbeliever, Allison was a church-going Christian. While he was moved by ideas and usually required time to make a decision, she was moved by feelings and was much more impulsive. And while he was poring over philosophy, she was poring over romantic classics, her favorite novelist being Emily Bronte. Nevertheless, says Allison, we understood each other. Both of us were people who found it very difficult to be understood by others. We were both solitary and uncomfortable around others. We didn't feel much need to explain ourselves to each other. We always seemed to understand without any explanation. We did not have to put on a mask or justify ourselves to each other. During the summer between his freshman and sophomore years, Eugene worked at a bookstore in San Francisco. His high school teacher, Mr. Baskerville, was a friend of the store's owners and recommended Eugene for the job. While working in San Francisco, Eugene stayed for 3 months at the Hôtel de France, a boarding house where everyone spoke French and ate European cuisine. When he returned to Pomona for his second year, Eugene was assigned a roommate who was a math major. According to John, this young man was constantly studying math problems, hardly ever cracked a smile, and had virtually no sense of humor. Eugene did not get along with him at all. They were totally mismatched roommates. It is interesting to observe that this roommate was precisely the kind of college student that Eugene's high school math teacher might have expected Eugene to become. As John has said, however, once Eugene found philosophy, everything changed for him. After the first semester of his sophomore year, Eugene was anxious to escape the dormitories, and so rented an inexpensive room with a private entrance built onto someone's house. Like Caizo, he had to earn money during his student years to pay his rent. Besides the sugar bowl, Eugene's room became the main meeting place for his group of friends. One of the group's acts of nonconformity was to stay at the meetings long past the 10 o'clock curfew at the dormitories. Although such acts were hardly what one would call revolutionary, the group did evoke some antagonism on the campus. In the fall of 1953, Lawrence McGilvray recalls, a politically minded classmate campaigned for election and won as men's senior class president on the platform of getting the nonconformists. We innocents surely were his chief targets, with our undefined aspirations and our passionate conversations in the sugar bowl and our midnight revels, at least once or twice, in the Greek theater out in the wash. At Eugene's place, the group would stay up all night, listening to classical music and talking, in Allison's words, about great things. Mostly we talked about the meaning of life, Allison recalls, though some of the others who were there merely recalled talking about books, music, painting, and sculpture. When the subject would turn to the question of God, John would sometimes start complaining about how he would have to give up women to be a priest. According to Allison, he believed that the best priests were celibate, and he wanted to let everyone know what a sacrifice he would be making. At most of these meetings, Eugene would remain characteristically silent, taking it all in carefully. He genuinely appreciated the company and the intellectual forum, but there were times when he felt that all this talk about the meaning of life was becoming just that, talk. He wanted to do something, even if he didn't know what it was. When he did take part in the discussion, it was often by way of challenging John's ideas about God. Eugene was an iconoclast, John recalls. He would deliberately say things to shock us, and then would watch our reaction. Sometimes he would break his silence, and right in the middle of a discussion, come out with a statement that would reduce everyone to speechlessness.